invited Jonathan here because A, we like him. B, he's awfully cute. C, isn't he cute?
He
Right.
has a nice sweater.
And C,
I just bring my good looks, you know.
I think I have that sweater.
he really knows what he's talking about. He's a former archivist of the Greene County Historical Society. He is the Greene County historian, so we're really proud to have him here. Today he's going to tell, is it the oldest ghost story in Greene County?
So far as I'm aware, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
William Salisbury and the Hangman's Noose. So, take it away.
This is great. So now you all at least know I'm recognized, if not a recognized authority. I'll also say generally, and this might annoy Brent a little bit, but I try to keep these little seminar-like, so as I'm talking about things, if anybody has a question, wants to interrupt me, raise their hand. I also encourage booing in this case because it just gets us in the mood of the season. So we're good to go. We're good to go. But I'll mention right off the bat, this talk is heavily based on some really excellent scholarship that was done in the early 2000s by a professor by the name of Judith Richardson. The book, which is called Possessions, is an authoritative review of ghost stories and legends of the Hudson Valley, and she does deep dives on a lot of these. It's a really excellent tool if you want to suck all of the fun out of ghost stories, make them really dry and academic and get clinical about it. But really, it's a great way to start thinking about the stories you might have encountered in your communities, a way to think about them in a fresh light. So I'll talk about that book again at the end. These things are all available through your local public libraries, so just keep that in mind to check these out afterwards. Because Halloween kicks off spooky season. It isn't the end of it. So we've all got ghost stories. I'm just going to put these three right up there. These are thoughts I want you to have floating around in your head for the rest of the presentation. Take a picture of them on your cell phone if you want so you can refer back to them and interrupt me. But thinking about what the root of a ghost story is. What does a ghost story say about the teller, most importantly, and how does the ghost story differ from history? So the roots of ghost stories, of course, we can think about these things in the context of, tragedies. Their origins are in tragedies. Their origins might be in the story of persecuted people. Their origins might be in the stories of communities that might not otherwise be represented in the historical record. So this is always an important thing to consider is, who are we actually talking about when we tell these tales? And what is the teller trying to tell you? Anytime, and this goes for historians, this goes for storytellers, this goes for anybody. Anytime somebody decides to tell you something, they have an agenda. Whether they're conscious of it or not might be another thing, but that ghost story is always going to convey a particular message that's close to the heart of the teller. So even when somebody tells you something spooky is happening in their house, there's a reason they're telling you that. They want to posture themselves in some particular way and cast themselves in some particular light. And how does the ghost story differ from history? So, well, there's the obvious parts, of course. There's not a lot of histories where there are translucent shades and skeletons and things like that. But history, of course, is an academic rigor that's burdened with being authentic to the facts of the past. And the ghost story, by contrast, is our tacit admonition that we can't know all of the facts of the past and that at some point something's got to fill in the gaps. We might know the salient points of a story, but when that teller goes to tell it, there might be something about it that they want to convey to you. There might be a spirit that they insert into the tale who gives agency to something that might not be borne out in the historic record. So in that way, the ghost story and history work in harmony to give us a better sense broadly of what a community feels about when they think about the facts of their past and their reactions to it. That was a long time on that slide. I promise we're going to be a little more brief. But some ghost stories of Greene County. The legend of Sally Hamilton. I'll just put all these right up here. Go down the list. Legend of Sally Hamilton, of course, anybody from Athens is familiar with the story of Murderer's Creek. The Murder of Anna Swartz, which is the one we're going to talk about today. The Dueling Room, which is another Athens story I heard as a kid. You know, oh, there's still a blood stain on the floor of the house, you know, things like that. Vitae the dog, which is the ghost dog of Cotterskill Falls, who jumps off the falls every year on the anniversary of his death in 1868. The Revenge of Shandaken and the One-Armed Brakeman, which are stories that there are versions of in Greene County, but the story gets adapted and moved place to place depending where you are in the Catskills. Especially the One-Armed Brakeman as a story is kind of a quintessential American railroad ghost tale that you find in any working class community where people were connected to rail infrastructure. And of course there's a version of it here in Greene because we had rail infrastructure here at one time, and there are stories of fatalities on those railroads. So the one-armed brakeman becomes a symbol of that working class past. He becomes a symbol, a warning tool. He's an omen, things like that. Any questions about any of this so far?
The dueling room.
The
That's
dueling
in
room.
Athens?
Yeah, the Albertus Van Loon house. And that's based... No, Carrie Fetter's house. There's an old stone house right on 385. I know I'm talking about Valley stuff now, and you know this is the I have webbed feet. I grew up in Athens, so this mountain air has me lightheaded already.
Back to the part where history changes differ. Now it does differ depending on the storyteller too, because throughout the centuries, storytellers tell different parts of the history, and it can change.
Exactly.
So from the story from the 1600s to now could differ because of the storyteller is not giving the specific details that were given back then.
Yeah.
So tale can change and twist from when it originated
that's
to now.
exactly one of the themes I want to touch on here. So what do these tales have in common? You know, most importantly, the last bullet point here, but we're going to be talking about that idea of evolution as we go forward here. So, you know, what do these tales have in common? Capture a moment in history. They're going to tell you about something that happened at some point in time, complete and incomplete memory of an event. Because really history is just our acceptance that we're going to forget just as much as we've ever known. And we're going to try to go back and recreate that in some way. Ornament a famous locale. This one should be on everybody's bumper stickers, you know, on the back of your car. You should have this on billboards because we're in the northern Catskills, and every single resort, every single boarding house, every single major hotel had a little travel guide that went along with it that told you all of these great things, and you know, just 5 minutes walk through the woods and you'll come to this majestic falls where this tragedy happened and this beautiful Indian maiden was here and things like that. Every single resort had that story. So many of these tales get co-opted as ornamentation. They create a picturesque setting for people to come to and visit. And scare the neighborhood kids. This one's very important too. So, the murder of Anna Swartz. Who here's ever driven along State Route 23B, the old Susquehanna Turnpike?
I live right there.
You live right there? You live right there? Half mile down the road. Okay, all right. Just clarifying. You're one of the Salisburys. Because I'm going to start casting stones at the Salisburys in a minute too. But this is the 1730 Salisbury Manor. And, you know, if I'm going to die on this hill, here we go. There were two Salisbury Manors. Everybody conflates them. There's a 1705 house that's been burned down, bulldozed, and gone since the 1920s. And there is the Salisbury Manor that's still standing at the intersection of 5 Mile Woods Road and 23B. Beautiful old house. You go down in the basement, and there's these big 16 by 24 inch beams down there holding up the whole building. It's really a spectacle to see. And it was the seat of the Salisbury family, who were one of the principal families of Greene County back before Greene County was a thing. So we're now hearkening back to pre-March 25th, 1800. So all through the 18th century, most of Greene County is part of old southern Albany County. And the Salisburys are among the top 1% of valued taxpayers living in the community at that time. Now, that includes Alexander Hamilton's future in-laws, the Schuylers. This includes branches of the Livingston family. This includes the Van Rensselaers. The Salisburys are the upper crust. They're important people. This is an age in the 1750s when land wealth correlates directly to political wealth and financial wealth, too. It's a class society. It's a class-based society. There are people who are in the lower strata. There are people who are, a burgeoning middle class, and there is the upper crust, who are the great landed gentry of the Catskills. And the Salisburys are among those people. William Salisbury's community immediately around him comprises of his neighbors, the Van Bergens, who are also part of that upper crust. It also includes Palatine German immigrants who have been there now for almost half a century. This also includes enslaved people. There are Native Americans still living in this district of the county at that time. And there's yeoman farmers, people who own a couple acres of land that they have as freeholders. It's a relatively diverse place even at that time. And William Salisbury, aside from having enslaved people living in his house, also has indentured servants. And one of these indentured servants is a woman named Anna Swartz, a young woman allegedly from a Palatine German family who was indentured to William Salisbury, and by all accounts, it was kind of hard to keep her from running off. So she would run away. William Salisbury would go out and fetch her, bring her home. And one day, finally, he is headed up to here. Anna Swartz runs away, and he goes out to find her. When he discovers her, he binds her hands with rope and ties the other end of the rope to him and his horse, and he starts trotting back to his stately manse. And on the way, the horse spooks and bolts, and Anna Swartz is dragged, and she's killed. Now, the community at large, it would seem, decides at that point that William Salisbury is really the responsible agent in her death. And stories begin to evolve virtually from the moment of her untimely death that he is the one who was guilty more or less of her murder. And this, of course, speaks to all sorts of class tensions that are, arising in the Hudson Valley at that time. This is the middle of the French and Indian War, but this is also the same decade that the Van Rensselaers march a little militia out into Massachusetts to try to claim eastern bounds of the patent and get into gunfights with the freeholders out there in an effort to expand the manor system that was operating in the Hudson Valley at that time. There's class tension and class struggle going on. There are freeholders and petty landowners and tenants who don't want to be under the thumb of what they see as these old English lords who are in charge of their land and controlling their daily lives. So for the people living in the immediate vicinity who knew Anna, who knew these families who were part of that Palatine migration, who might have been the local freeholders, they see William Salisbury as the target of their anger in this incident. And so we'll jump ahead to 1824. So we've had this community simmering about this death for a long period of time. In 1824, the Catskill Mountain House was built, and the Susquehanna Turnpike, which had been the principal highway going from Catskill out west into the Mohawk Valley, where all the settlers moved after the Revolutionary War, becomes the turnpike for a new class of tourists coming to the Catskills to enjoy them for their aesthetic value. And one of these guys is this fellow by the name of William Leete Stone. Colonel Stone, if you asked him, self-styled with, I think he was a member of the state militia at that time, and that's how everybody gets their captain and colonel and major titles. So Captain Stone, who's a newspaper editor at that time, travels to the Catskill Mountain House, and on his way out there, he gets some of the local flavor. He talks to the local people. He gets their stories. He gets their sense of what the community is before he goes out and stays at this 5-star resort on the side of a cliff looking over the valley. Nice place to go. One of the stories he records is this tale of the murder of this indentured servant girl, Anna Swartz, and the ghost that forever haunted William Salisbury to his dying day afterwards. Anna Swartz, of course, dies tragically, and any time in advance of a storm, you could walk by Salisbury Manor, and William Salisbury might have been tucked away in there, and out at the end of the road was the howling specter of Anna Swartz with flames coming from her fingertips. Or perhaps she'd appear as a skeleton in a shroud, and there would be, a ghost dog barking, running off towards the scene where she died, and that specter would haunt this place, this evil visage, as a reminder to the community at large of this crime that had happened, something that nobody had ever gone to justice for, and as a reminder to William Salisbury himself, who actually had only died in 1801. So he lived right up to the beginning of the 19th century, and the community simmered and stewed on this story virtually throughout, all of his twilight years.
Jonathan,
Yeah.
when did she die? What
So, 1755. Yes, I'm sorry if I didn't mention that. I get really excited about the skeletons and the flames coming from fingertips and things like that. I get really hung up on it. Yeah, so 1755 Anna dies, and for the ensuing, this is 70 years now from that time to when Stone records this story. This story has arisen and evolved and become this centerpiece of the community identity in a way. It's a story of the working class people who are in this community who lose one of their native daughters at the hands of this capricious man, who just for the sake of controlling one other person saw this woman dragged to her death by his horse. Now, Stone embellishes the story at that time with all of the hallmarks of a good Gothic novel. So he adds in, a ghost cow. He adds in this ghost dog. He festoons this. He really does with it's like a checklist he goes down of all the things you'd need in a good Gothic horror of that time. This is the American Romantic period. We're just a few years away from Thomas Cole showing up and saying, geez, the mountains are really pretty, aren't they? Everybody look at this picture. So this is when, who is it? William Cullen Bryant writes Thanatopsis in 16, yeah. So right around this time, to be a brother to the insensible rock, these people who are connecting with nature, they're connecting with the past, they're immersing themselves in these stories for the sake of the story. And William Leete Stone records this tale with all of these hallmarks of the Gothic horror. Now, his version of the story as recorded becomes extremely popular apparently because people who read his newspaper, people who are privy and in the know, who are going out to the Mountain House now know about this tale. And so as they're riding out the Susquehanna Turnpike to the Mountain House, which is, hopping on the New York State Thruway of that time and heading up to the Catskills for a vacation, they all immerse themselves in this tale as well. It becomes so popular that in 1862, Miriam Coles Harris, a novelist, decides to adapt the story of Anna Swartz and her death as an abolitionist narrative. Anna Swartz, the Palatine German girl, becomes an African-American slave. William Salisbury, the capricious master, becomes one of the Sutherlands, this old landed family of the district. And this novel, titled The Sutherlands, published in 1862, based heavily on the story of Anna Swartz and the Salisbury family, goes through 11 printings. It becomes an important regional novel. It's so popular that in 1867, when the Atlas of Greene County is published by, J.B. Beers and Company, Salisbury Manor is listed on the map as the Sutherlands, in quotation marks. So the story becomes one of a slave girl. And the community, by the 1890s, recalls this as a story of a slave girl who had been killed by Salisbury rather than a Palatine German girl. The memory of the community evolves with the tellers. So rather than giving agency to the story of this class tension in these Palatine families, we've instead touched on this idea of class and race by the 1860s with this tale. And this enters, what's his name? I'm going to blank on it now. published Legends of Our Own Land in 1896, which should be a red flag. This is the beginning of the Jim Crow era. This is an era of increased racial sensitivity in the United States. And the guy who publishes Legends in Our Own Land, Richard something, I'm going to blank on his last name, essentially creates a version of the tale that whitewashes it yet again. Rather than it being a Palatine German girl or an African-American slave, Anna Swartz is now some ill-fated Scottish girl with no particular affiliation to anything. She just happens to live near the Salisburys, and she gets killed, and it's awful, and now there's a ghost. A lot of Legends in Our Own Land is mostly warnings about interracial relationships and things like that. It's really, really a product of its time, but again, here's this evolution where we take this story that starts off, Palatine German girl, African-American slave, and now we've whitewashed the tale yet again to speak to another moment in our collective consciousness. And now we've got utter confusion. So enter the 20th century. The Catskill Daily Mail in the 1940s is publishing some letters by recognized authorities. Ella Rush Murray, one of our friendly neighborhood suffragettes who, was out of work after, the 19th Amendment is passed. She is writing in 1942 to the Catskill Daily Mail telling all of the salient facts of the story of Anna Swartz, who, some people think was a Scottish girl, some people think was a slave, but she was actually a German girl. And somehow we've come full circle again because there's documentary evidence, it turns out. In the 1920s, Jesse Vetter, the county historian, records a version of the legend of Anna Swartz that is her attempt to get back to the authentic facts of the past. And that is based on, that is based on an indictment that is preserved at the Greene County Historical Society at that time. So we're going to get right into the weeds here because I think I skipped ahead. I get carried away with my skeleton talk. So we'll jump right ahead to this. This is the document. This is the only documentary evidence that this murder, this alleged incident actually happened. So this document is, it's an indictment, it's a summons of a grand jury to hear the facts of the death of Anna Swartz. She's given as Anna Dorothea Swartz in here, who was dragged to death by a horse owned by William Salisbury, and William Salisbury was in control of the horse at that time, and she dies in 1755. And the great mystery here is that this indictment isn't issued until 1762, so 7 years after the event, which just adds a whole other layer to the mystery for us as historians looking back on this. And it lends a lot of credence to the idea that the evolution of this story and the roots of this story are this outgrowth of a sense in the community that there was a miscarriage of justice. Here's Anna who dies in 1755, and now, lo and behold, the landed gentry are only now hearing this case after we've been kicking and screaming about it for a whole 7 years. They waited until this little regional conflict called the French and Indian War was kind of put to bed, and now they're going back and they're going to see if William Salisbury actually did it. And of course, the jury renders a verdict that there isn't enough evidence to even bring this to trial. So on the back of the document is written the phrase ignoramus, which is in reference, it's an old Latin term that's used in the courts to refer to a hung jury, more or less. There's just not enough there to proceed. So this probably right here, not only is it the first documentation that Anna's a real person, that this thing actually did happen, it's also the first representation of this idea of this miscarriage of justice and why Anna as a ghost might appear and haunt William Salisbury. So I went through this already because I was getting really excited, but here we've got Sutherland's. This is the 1867 atlas. This is the Susquehanna Turnpike, and of course, one of my great mysteries that I'm curious about is why they decided also to add Old Tree on there, which I'd love to go and find. Boy, I really ran with this. Yes. So here, we'll jump right to this. So this is one of the important things also that we should take away is that really, you know, the story is about Anna Swartz the ghost. And William Salisbury is actually the subject. He is the consistent one throughout all of this time. So William Salisbury is never a spirit in this, even though he dies by the time that this story is recorded. There's no ghost of William Salisbury. There's just this reminder of his crime. So in this way, Anna, who we don't even know her birth date, we don't know anything about her other than that she's probably this indentured girl and she does die in 1755. In this way, even in life as she ornamented William Salisbury's life, now in death she ornaments his crime and what happened. And so William Salisbury, the capricious master, is the one we always come back to as the centerpiece of this tale.
So there was not even no age that they can identify how she could have been?
Nope, nothing. There's literally, we have no idea of a birth date, we just know a death date. We're not even 100% certain that she's a Palatine German woman, and there's a lot of debate about whether or not she is African American or white. Anna Swartz, Anna Dorothea Swartz, certainly that's a Germanic surname. It's very probable, but Swartz is also an extraction of, Dutch.
I figured they
German
had no
for black.
bookings, like, right? They didn't book the servants that they book in. Like,
No.
And the book when they clocked in
well,
and clocked out, or.
And this
Or when
gets
you
back
bought
to,
them.
this gets back to another point as well. You know, with the advancing of time, you lose documentary evidence. So at one time, maybe William Salisbury had an account book. Maybe he kept a rent book of the tenant families living on his properties. But that doesn't survive anymore. It doesn't exist. We can't refer back to it. So, you know, and in this way, the story of Anna Swartz, again, it becomes an ornament of this story and these things that we one time knew.
Jonathan, where is Salisbury buried?
In a cow pasture. William Salisbury, the Salisbury Cemetery and the Van Bergen Cemetery, which are two of the oldest burial grounds in that section of the county. The Van Bergen Cemetery has been a tilled field for the last 150 years. The graves are all lost. And the Salisbury Cemetery is just a little east of Salisbury Manor in the middle of a cow pasture. There's a family that sells hay there now. And you can go see a couple of the stones, but William Salisbury's stone has been gone for a long time.
And there's no location, no hint of a location where the indentured servants or slaves would have been buried?
No, actually, and that's another interesting point. You know, so first off, whether or not, based on the burial customs of that time, whether or not these graves would have ever been marked in a permanent way is a question. But also, Henry Brace, who's the historian extraordinaire for the town of Catskill in the 1870s and 80s, does a very exhaustive study of the early burial places around the town of Catskill. And he spends a lot of time talking about, yes, this is where these old cemeteries were, but in tellings from my friend's grandfather, he said that the slaves were buried in this grove near where the old Indian mound was, or something like that. So you'll see these allusions to these places, but they're never a formal location. They're never like an improved burial ground.
Have people ever dug up bones that were verified as people from that time, like till today? No.
No. So, but this all gets back to how long does this tale survive? And I'm going to put these up. There we go. So, three things. So, the original location of the murder is lost to time. Carol.
I just wanted to ask, Jonathan, is this area that you're talking about the same area that they call the Great Embot?
No.
Where is the Great Embot in relation?
So the Embuff is a farming district of southern Catskill along the Hudson River. So Embuff Road is, you know, kind of the central thoroughfare through that whole district. But the entire town of Catskill before 1788 is referred to as the Great Embuff District of Albany County. And that, of course, changes with the state law that's passed in 1788 requiring divisions into towns. But yeah, the Embuff is different. These are the 5 plains, where this takes place is really the 5 plains of the Catskill Patent. There were 5 great, previously cleared, historic swaths of farmland that had been used by the regional Mohican tribes for millennia prior to Europeans arriving there. And the Salisburys and the Van Bergens essentially slap their houses down and get a patent that essentially draws a circle for like a 5-mile radius around their homes in Leeds, New York. And that becomes the nucleus of what is originally referred to as Catskill, later becomes Leeds. But to that end, so first off, you think about that, the confusion of what I'm discussing, the idea that all these place names, even like the proper nouns, evolve over time like this. This is relatively recent. We could talk about 10,000 years of human history in this section of the Hudson Valley, and we're grasping at straws to interpret 300 of them. Now, the original location of the murder is given as various places, but generally, community members recollect it as being a place called Spooky Hollow, which is now the interchange for exit, 21 on the New York State Thruway in Catskill. Spooky Hollow was a neighborhood out there, and allegedly Jesse Vedder was even a school teacher in the Spooky Hollow district, which was a little schoolhouse that was out in that neighborhood near where the Thruway exit is now. So just even these essential things like the touchstone location where this might have occurred have been obliterated. Changing patterns and...
We live near Greene Lake.
Yes.
And there's a dark part of Valley Road, and that always was referred to me as
Spooky Hollow, okay, yeah. Because, so, and again, like there's also a version of the tale where the story takes place going down 5 Mile Woods Road, and that the murder took place there, if you can call it a murder. So it's all over the place. And the ghost, and this is probably the most important part, the ghost doesn't haunt Spooky Hollow, wherever Spooky Hollow is. The ghost haunts Salisbury Manor, hangs out by the roadside there. And that gets to changing patterns and modes of travel. So, of course, at one time, driving out the Susquehanna Turnpike, later State Route 23, now State Route 23B, everybody went by. If you were going to vacation in the Catskills, right up until the bypass is constructed, you drove by Salisbury Manor, and you were the recipient of oral traditions. You might have stopped in Leeds to get a bite to eat before driving out to the mountains, and you would have been able to hear this story or encounter this story from somebody. You would have driven by that old stone house and seen, this haunted locale and gone and asked questions about it. But now, of course, you hop on the bypass, you do 60 miles an hour through Cairo, you'd never know this house was there. I didn't know that house was there until I started working for the Historical Society, and I live in this area. So, lastly also, and this gets to the idea of the evolution of these tales, is the advent of the internet. The internet, which I love, it's great. It's a recognized authority on everything, apparently. I can go there and find everything I need to know about everything. Yeah, it must be true. I read it online.
Yeah.
The internet is a venue that freezes these stories in time. It makes the story extremely accessible, but it also prevents a continuing evolution, because now anybody can go and refer back to a
Because I've
version
done
of the
some
tale.
researches and I can read 2-3 different stories of the same event, and I'm like, which one is the one closest to the true one?
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know which one is the real one.
So the story in that way becomes something that's an amalgamation of everything recorded to that point. And the question becomes, are we going to let this story continue to advance and change and keep telling us something about ourselves over the course of time? And so now that I've bungled all of the slideshow up to this point, wasn't it worth waiting for the projector? We'll jump right to questions. So we've already had some good ones, but I know we've probably got some thoughts here. Carolyn?
So, in your original write-up, you teased with a reference to Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Did I?
You did.
I don't recall that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so the I think the reference I'm going to show you.
Okay.
I'll send it to you. But is that a part of that story, or one of the iterations of that story, is that Salisbury felt guilty for the rest of his life, and he wore a red, whatever
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
so that people could identify him. He died at age 99 or 100, never having been brought to justice. But it evokes, or really foreshadows, Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel, The Scarlet Letter, Hester Prynne, and the red A on her outfit because she's an adulterer.
You know, I disagree, actually. And this is great. This put two historians in a room, end up with three
I
opinions.
didn't say it. You evoked it.
Okay.
Or I thought you did. I have no way of knowing.
Yeah, I don't recall that, but it's interesting because I really did gloss over that last part. And this is one of the ideas that gets touched on again with the idea of the miscarriage of justice in William Salisbury. There's versions of the story that are just the murder of Anna Swartz, the ghost of Leeds, and the hangman's noose is one of the other ones because it is alleged in one of the versions of the story that Salisbury is convicted of the murder, but because of his stature is scheduled to visit the hangman only when he reaches the age of 99. And up till that time is supposed to wear a silken thread as a reminder of his date with the gallows. And it's not used as a symbol for the community at large, like Hawthorne and the A in the Scarlet Letter. It's used as a reminder for him. It's an inner torment that every day he has to put that silken cord on under his clothes to remember his date with the gallows. And of course, the story ends up evolving that, well, Salisbury even cheated that. He lived to the age of 110 and he didn't ever... And this is a total departure from the realities of the story, too, in that, you know, anybody in Leeds at the time Stone visited there in 1824 could have said, yeah, Salisbury died at the age of 85. And he's buried over there if you want to go see it. But this idea of the miscarriage of justice, this idea of the landed gentry getting away with it, that sticks. That sticks. And that inner torment, too. Again, Salisbury's not the ghost, but he is the centerpiece of the story. So, yeah.
Is that supposed to be Anna in the corner there?
Yes,
Oh.
that is. Minus her head. We're
Yeah.
sorry. She lost
We
her
have
head.
several spirits that have been sharing that dress.
Any other questions?
Now, has there been any paranormal activity or people that have gone to the house and picked up any spirits? Like, I do ghost box. I do the spirit box stuff. I have,
Okay.
and I'm just curious to know if there has been any.
You know,
Recent.
there's loads of stories from kids in the neighborhood
Yeah.
that there's all these ghosts in Salisbury Manor. You know, one of the previous residents of the house alleges that, you know, there were all these ghosts that she played with when she was a kid. But the Butts family, who has owned the house for the last 60 years now, or 50 years, I think,
Nothing.
they've been happy tenants of the home for a very long time, and they don't seem to be bothered by anything. And you know, but the community, again, you see these places. You know, you see an old house like that that is vested with all of this history. That's vested with so many possible stories. You know, 300 years of history in that house, and to fill in those gaps, we're going to festoon the house with spirits that touch on themes of the home's history. You know, so I've heard stories of, well, there's a pit in the basement where the slaves were kept, and there's ghosts of the slaves around the property and things like that. And that, of course, is a way for us to open the door to talking about the idea that there were slaves here at this place in upstate New York. You know, it's a way for the community to remember that in some way. I've got two questions.
I just had a
Yeah.
comment. You recalled for me that I was waiting for my car to get fixed in Kingston, and the gentleman next to me lived in Catskill down on the Embot, how do you say? Embot Road.
Yeah.
And I said I'd never been down there, but of course I headed down there as soon as I left.
Yeah.
And he said that he had lived in this house, and in his backyard was a private cemetery. It's not a public cemetery, and it's filled with 1600s stones.
Well, that's the Van Orden, or the Overboss Cemetery. And there's no stones from the 1600s anywhere in Greene County. I know that because I have looked and looked and looked.
So, and what was the name of the cemetery?
The Overbaugh Cemetery, and that cemetery does have one of the earliest gravestones in the county.
Really?
It dates to 1737. It's for the original immigrant Overbaugh, who was, I think, of a Palatine German extraction. He comes here with the Palatine migration, dies in 1737, and it's down below the Kikit, the lookout hill on the Embuff, down around the back of it, kind of on the old Overbaugh farm. But that's the stone, the oldest stone out there is 1737, and it's a field stone marker with initials and the dates kind of mushed in there however they fit best. It's just a chunk of blue stone.
And the name on it is Overbaugh?
No, it's just the initials.
Oh.
The last name starts with the surname O, but he was the only resident of that district at that time who died there and could have been buried there with those initials, and his will corroborates the dates. So, but it's an Overbaugh. And the Overbaughs are still out there, along with the Van Ordens, along with, a bunch of the other early families.
Those are Dutch people.
Yeah, the Van Ordens, yes. But near there was where the Loveridges lived. Near there is where the Du Bois family had their original estates when they came north from New Paltz. But, yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Does that house have a historic marker on it?
It doesn't. And it doesn't have a historic marker probably because the family would like to keep it, a house rather than a museum that everybody's dropping by. That's the other thing is when we talk about ghost stories, especially now because of the internet, anytime a place is haunted, people descend on it. And this is a great marketing tool for some places. If you have a haunted hotel, you've got your October bookings all taken care of every year. You're guaranteed an audience, things like that. But in this case, there's never been any markers put up because, the story is being perpetuated and kept on its own without any additional. Any other questions?
There's a house from here to Pratt to Grand Gorge, the stone house. I don't remember exactly where it is.
The Hardenberg.
Is that one with the slave tunnels that they built underground, the basement that they had, and they had tunnels through?
If I had $1 for every tunnel story I had heard.
Yeah. And the top floor is supposed to be a woman wearing a white dress eventually, always now and again looks out. You ever heard anything about that? No?
I can tell you that story.
Yeah.
Okay, so, the version that was, first appears in print probably in the 1940s is of an enslaved person who, Johannes Hardenberg, who was the largest slaveholder in New York State and lived in Kingston. He built the Hardenberg Manor for, depends on who you speak to, either his grandson or his nephew. I tend to think it was his grandson, which makes the house much older than his nephew, but whichever, he had enslaved people. And if you're interested, get in touch with me. I can give you the names of several of the enslaved people who were there. Now, one of those enslaved women, as the story goes, was on the second floor of the house, and she was opening the window to air out the bedroom. And when she opened the window off in the forest, well, she saw the two Hardenberg children playing in the yard, so to speak. But off in the distance, because of her vantage point, she saw Native Americans about to descend upon them and abduct them. And so she screamed, and forever after, according to local kids here, the window flies open because of the trauma of what happened. As far as we can tell, it was not the site of an underground railroad, probably quite the opposite. Agnes Hardenberg, who was the last living Hardenberg, she refused to marry because she didn't want to give up her name, ran a boarding house there until probably the 1940s, and then sold it to the Merwin family. But it certainly was the site of enslaved people in a manor house similar to the Salisbury manor house.
I've heard of this.
There are not.
No, they're not. No.
There are no chains. As a matter of fact, any stories that are handed down, and sadly, these are all oral,
Yeah.
except for we did have the diary of one enslaved person who had stayed of her own free will with Agnes Hardenberg. Her name was Delilah, and that was damaged in the flood, Hurricane Irene.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know. But so they were very good to, an oxymoron, but they were very good to their slaves.
Okay.
So that's the story of the Hardenberg
Thank you.
house.
Sharon,
And also, that's one of those houses that it used to be on the register,
Yeah, it's
and the
not.
new people took it off because the bakers were wonderful. They used to let you go in and what have you. These people
Yeah.
don't want anything to do with.
Okay.
Got a question.
I just have one last question. The name of Anna Schwartz, there's a first name, middle name, and last name, which
Yes.
is unusual to give the
Yeah.
full name. Is that only because of the indictment that you know that? Is there any
Probably.
other?
Yeah, and that's literally the only place her name is ever recorded.
Oh,
So that's what it's based on. Even in Jesse Vedder's story, a version of the tale from 1921 or 22, she gives her name as Dorothy, the indentured servant girl.
oh.
So she forgets the Anna part for whatever reason. But yeah, that's maybe. So, but any other questions about that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
As far as any capital punishment in Greene County,
Yeah.
I'm looking for that because I've
boy.
actually have a Court of Appeals case and a murder in Hudson,
Okay.
but they were indicted. 2 people were indicted, and I can't find out what happened to them. I have my own suspicions, but I was looking even at Greene County to see if there.
So there are 4 executions in Greene County over the course of the 19th century.
Okay.
Those are the only executions.
Right.
I'm going to blank on all of them except for, I think one of them is, Joseph Waltz, who was a mentally ill man who is executed kind of in spite of everything, and there's this large public outcry in 1876 concerning it, but he had killed a peddler, and then he killed one of the jailers in the county jail, and he's hung in 1876, but there were 3 previous ones, 2 Irish immigrants, which probably tells you a lot about that moment in time, and one other gentleman who I think committed a murder in Coxsackie.
Well, okay, that's the case I'm referring to is it shows up in 1921,
Yeah.
but I've looked high and low, and I read the verdict, and I found one reference to Clinton.
Well, it's in Hudson, you said?
It was in Hudson, but I was
So
looking,
it's a different court system.
No, I know.
too, yeah.
but I was hunting all over just to see where they were, if they had capital punishment around here, and I did read something, they had it for 10 years in Greene County.
Well, there's the last execution in Greene County is 1876.
Yeah, well, this is after that.
Yeah,
This is
so-
at the turn of the century.
Probably by then it would have been a state for either Auburn,
Well, for Clinton.
either Auburn or Clinton, or
Right.
then by the
But I
1920s,
couldn't
Sing
find-
Sing
I couldn't
mostly.
find them there. I actually have a list of everybody that was in Auburn in 1826. I used to collect this
Oh,
stuff.
1820.
No, I'm talking about right in the 3rd century, but
Jonathan, excuse me,
What?
isn't there an attorney who did a fabulous slide presentation, goes back probably 40 years, but I think he's still living in Catskill, on capital punishment in Greene County?
I'd like to.
Do you know his name?
You have me at a disadvantage for a presentation 40 years ago.
Well, but the fact
Yeah.
is that it's
No, you know,
online,
there-
it's not age, it's something that was presented, I
You
think,
know,
at the Greene County Historical
Ted Hilscher
Society.
and I have talked about this together.
Oh, I have the
Ori
guy's name.
Vincent,
I'll send it
Ori
to you.
Vincent might have been another who was
No, it's a
presenting,
fabulous, and the name of one of the people was Volkman, who kidnapped the child.
Volkman is executed outside of Greene County.
But he committed the crime in Greene County.
Yes,
His people
yes.
were from Prattsville, so
Yeah,
he abducted a child. So
Yeah.
that's one of the.
Yeah. So, but again, like executions in the county that we're focusing on,
Well,
it ends after 76.
I read this whole trial, about 90 pages.
All right.
Found out a lot of other information,
I bet.
but I
bet.
don't know what happened to the two people that were.
Well, they're dead now. I
Well, I'm
guess.
sure no, I have a reason to know. I have a reason to find out. Okay.
Jonathan, you said, Jonathan, the
Yes.
Susquehanna Turnpike that goes in front of the Salisbury Manor, you said was the major highway
Yes.
at the time.
Yeah.
Where did it originate?
So the terminus of the Susquehanna Turnpike is actually the village of Catskill.
And it went to Wild Cemetery.
Yeah, if you go out to Unadilla, when you're out in the western Delaware County, you'll see signs for the Catskill Turnpike. That's the Susquehanna Turnpike. It's just they gave it a different name out there, even though
Right.
the incorporation papers and all the
It went
invoices
south.
say
right,
Susquehanna.
after
Well, so it goes from Unadilla to Catskill, and at Catskill it ends on the other side of the river at the ferry connection in Greendale. It connects with a whole network of turnpikes that kind of drained people from southwestern New England, southeastern New England, beginning in the late 1790s.
And the highway that, I always forget the name, I think it's lawyer something. It starts in Leeds. It doesn't exist anymore. You only see parts of it until you get up to Sharon Springs. But what was the original?
That's- So starting in Leeds is the Susquehanna, but there's Lunenburg Turnpike.
Lunenburg, that's it.
But that is actually just a term that's given for, I think, the Schoharie Turnpike when you get out further west
Which starts where? Where
in
does it?
Athens.
It starts in Athens.
Yes.
And what was the original name of Athens?
Well, the original names of Athens are, there was no Athens per se prior to 1805, but the large agrarian farming district is Lunenburg. There's a separate land speculation called Esperanza. Yeah, and then the village of Athens is incorporated as the first planned community in the county in 1805.
1805.
Yeah,
Okay.
so. Boy, I just got loads of. You can see why I'm a riot at parties,
What's
folks.
that?
This is
Yeah.
a story from one of our.
So are there any other
Oh,
questions?
yeah, I have some of these.
Because if not, I'm going to thank you, Jonathan. It was a wonderful
Hey,
presentation.
thanks, folks.
And we have some refreshments. We have some homemade baked goods by our board member, Carol Cangelozzi. Delicious. Thank you, Carol.